Hello, I'm Joanne Gallagher, your Think.Future Podcast host. Today I'm talking to Nicolas Ramirez, Director of the Green Building Council in Costa Rica, about the policy trends in the region and a new guide for developers. Nicolas is committed to making tangible contributions to accelerate market transformation towards a built environment that prioritizes the well-being of all its occupants for both current and future generations. Join us in a minute to hear more. This podcast is brought to you by Arcons, a global leader pioneering solutions and services to the AEC and manufacturing industries who support digital transformation for the built environment and smart manufacturing. Visit arcons.net to learn more about how Arcons are helping organizations design, build, and solve through digitalization. From Arcons to you, welcome to our Think Future podcast series. Each week we'll share conversations with industry leaders from around the world to find out how they're thinking future. Subscribe to Arcons Think Future for access to more episodes, interviews, and profiles. Nicolas Ramirez is the Executive Director of the Green Building Council of Costa Rica. He is actively developing and implementing initiatives that positively impact the sustainable construction sector in Costa Rica and the Central American region. Nicolas has 15 years of experience running his own general contracting firm in Costa Rica and advocates for a paradigm shift in the built environment, leading to social, ecological, and financial sustainability and return on investment. Welcome to the program, Nicolas.
Thank you, Joanne. Very happy to be here.
It's great to have you. You are the director of the Costa Rica Green Building Council. Could you tell us a little bit how you got to be in that role, your education and background for the audience?
Sure, be happy to, Joanne. My journey is a little bit out of the ordinary, perhaps. I studied civil engineering first at the University of Costa Rica, and I founded a construction company with a friend of mine who were classmates at the time. We didn't have anything to put on our curriculum, so we wanted to do something together and get something on there. So we had a few projects under our belts. And a few years into that, we started working with some eco-lodges, and I started to learn about sustainable construction from my clients, actually, because I was very technically oriented and became very interested in that area. And I was actually one of the founders of the Green Building Council of Costa Rica back in 2012 while I was still working in my private practice. Kept working with my practice and eventually decided to dissolve the construction company, need to be a little bit more at home, move more into consulting and not be away from the family so much. And just at that time, the Green Building Council had been slowly growing, and they were actually looking for an executive director. I didn't know about it at the time, and I was contacted by some of my friends from the Green Building Council, and they told me to apply for the job. So I did, and I've been there since 2018 now. Along the way, I might want to mention that along the way, I also did some specialization work, some postgraduate studies in construction management with the University of Texas, and corporate entrepreneurship with the University of Maryland. To kind of broaden my horizons a little bit.
I noticed the University of Maryland. Did you actually go there and study, or did you do it online, or how did that work?
No, it was one of those things, the many online things that popped up during the pandemic. I really wanted to continue to study and grow, and especially in the idea of not losing creativity or innovation within a structured environment like a corporation. Lots of our members are big corporates, and they tend to be a little bit more stagnant and not as creative. And I didn't want to lose that, let's say, that drive that I had as an entrepreneur. So that seemed to be the perfect combination at the time. It actually was pretty helpful for me.
Did you say eco-lodges?
Yes. I had a small construction company, and just by issues of fate, ended up meeting some people that were in the eco-lodge industry, and one referred me to another. And before I knew it, more than 70-80% of our work was with high-end eco-lodges, very luxurious boutique hotels and eco-lodges, which Costa Rica is very well known for.
Yes, it is. So what else makes Costa Rica very unique in the region?
A few things. I think probably looking from the outside, probably your audience might have heard of Costa Rica in terms of rainforest, biodiversity. An ex-president won a Nobel Peace Prize several years ago for abolishing the military. And I think that kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of things that came after that with the abolition of the army, of the armed forces. Costa Rica has enjoyed quite a bit of political stability since then, which has led also to some maybe more economic stability than some of the other countries in the region. So that's been very beneficial. That the same actions that where the army was abolished, that money was decided to be put towards public education. So there are very high indexes of education in Costa Rica, and that's probably helped move things along the way as well. So I think those are some of the things that might be more known for. Obviously, biodiversity more recently, ecotourism is something that's well known for as well. And I think that that combination of not having an army, not having so much, let's say, political turmoil, maybe, as some of the other countries have been fallen victim to. That coupled with the education has made for like a very, maybe a little bit of a unique society, I think, in that sense. And on the other hand, being a small country, Joanne, it does enable us to, let's say, try things quicker and implement things quicker. Now, obviously, not as big a country as Australia or some of these others, where you have just massive things to see change and see how the needle moves in certain areas when you do different things. That's happened here. Costa Rica has become very well known for its reforestation activities. We were below 50% in the 70s, and by the 90s, we were way back up. It's one of the success stories of reforestation globally. Right now, it's in the top 10 of the OECD countries in terms of reforestation and forest coverage.
So when it comes to the built environment, it's a delicate balance, I'd say, in Costa Rica, because you're very much concerned about biodiversity. How is that being managed? Can you tell me what it's like there?
Sure. I think like many innovative ideas that come along, it's important to remember that Costa Rica is a developing country, right? So obviously, cost, economy, and even upfront cost are issues that are very important here in our built environment. When projects are being built, being spec'd, how they're going to be carried out, how they're going to be designed. Often the upfront cost is probably the biggest factor in decision making. So as a Green Building Council, for us, it's a constant, let's say, a constant paradigm that we're trying to change. Is that we need to look, even though we are a developing country, we need to look beyond just the short term, look towards the midterm and long term. So an example of that in the built environment is, there may be a building that's might cost a little less if we build it a certain way, but it's going to cost more to operate. It may not be so healthy, so the people within the building may be sick more often, and that also has repercussions and indirect costs and this and that. In terms of education, we already have statistics that demonstrate how academic achievement is higher within certain types of built environment than in others. So these are the things we kind of harp on and try to hit home to make sure that, okay, we understand we don't have money to throw away or to burn, but we want to invest it wisely, and we need to make sure we're looking at the aspects that are really valuable in the mid to long term, not just the short.
And these learnings from Costa Rica are very special. How are you sharing those within the wider Green Building Council network?
It's very interesting. As a Green Building Council, we have a wonderful network where it's broken down into regions. We're all members of the World Green Building Council, which I think right now unites close to 80 green building councils worldwide. We ourselves are part of the ARN, which is the Americas Regional Network. And this comprises all GBCs from Canada to Chile, which I think there's 17 or 18 of us right now. So we have different levels, let's say, of collaboration. Obviously, we participate in World GBC global projects like Advancing Net Zero or the Circularity Accelerator or Better Places for People, several very valuable projects that we participate in. We get to collaborate with other GBCs from around the world, but we also do networking at a regional level. So we have monthly meetings for our Americas Regional Network. Right now, we have a chair and a co-chair for the Americas Regional Network. The chair is from Guatemala. She's my colleague, Pamela Castellan, from the Green Building Council of Guatemala. And I myself am the co-chair for the Americas Regional Network right now. And we rotate that every couple of years. So there is a chance to share locally, obviously within Central America, within the other Green Building Councils like Panama, Guatemala, El Salvador. We do help each other out, and we learn from each other because we have certain similarities, maybe more so than with the Canadian Green Building Council, something like that at times. But you'd be surprised to realize how many synergies there are. For example, I've collaborated on several occasions with Davina Rooney from the Green Building Council of Australia, who has great insight. I'm a huge fan of hers and the work she does with Jorge Chapa and other people there, and with the Chile Green Building Council and so on and so forth. So there's always like little opportunities to learn and to share. And the network is really great for that. We really do. I think we do leverage it quite well.
That's great to hear. And what are the trends in Central America? And can you compare them to trends, say, in Australia or elsewhere?
Sure. I think within the built environment, or let's say the construction sector in general, there are certain trends that are global, maybe at a higher or lower grade or of intensity or uptake, but they are present. Obviously, there is a definite shift towards net zero in general. There is more and more consciousness about health and well-being within the built environment. I think the pandemic brought that to light for all of us all over the world. Maybe those of us who worked in the sector, for us, it was easier to connect the dots between the built environment, health and well-being, and the economy. We saw those three issues very tied together, but many people outside that didn't. I think the pandemic helped for everyone through it. When all of a sudden people started saying, wow, the built environment really does have an effect on my health, my well-being, my safety, so on and so forth, and that in turn with the economy. So I think post-pandemic, that's something general maybe we've seen all over the world. But there are places that there are some things more advanced than others. For example, I think here we're still not there yet, for example, on issues like carbon tax, which is something already being discussed in other places. Right now, Costa Rica is developing its green finance taxonomy, which was launched, I think, 4 years ago in Europe, 3 years ago in Colombia, and 2 years ago in Mexico. And we're right now working on ours, just to give you an idea of where we are with that. So those are the kind of things that help kind of define, what is green, what is not, what can be applicable for green finance, what cannot. Things like that. So there are general, let's say, trends or movements globally. And I think there are certain things that are maybe a little bit closer to home for certain areas. For Central America, something that's very particular right now, Joanne, is resilience. We're all seeing the effects of climate change. As smaller countries, maybe not as industrialized, we realize that although it's important for us to work on mitigation, we're not really going to move the needle that much, no matter what we do locally, right? But we do realize that we will be we will receive and feel and live the effects and the impacts of climate change. So resilience and adaptation are issues that are very close to home, especially in countries like Costa Rica, where we have two coasts, and you have lots of communities very close to the ocean front.
Some of the guests on the show have been talking about a mindset shift or change that relates to policy. Are you seeing that in Costa Rica? And can you explain sort of policy changes that you see are necessary?
Sure. I usually explain it this way. We do a lot of advocacy work, obviously, here, both with the public sector, with the private sector. And I usually describe it this way, Joanne. There's basically two paradigms that GBC of Costa Rica is constantly trying to change in all of the circles in which we are present. One of them, you can try and imagine it a little bit more in a horizontal frame. You think about a project's life cycle from which is born when there's a client has a need for something and tries to solvent that need through the development of a project. So you have the client calls in usually a design team, then they do a budget and design, then they bring in contractors and they do the project, then they fulfill it, then people move in or start to use it, and so on. So what we want to do is have people understand that sustainable construction does not occur only in the construction phase of that timeline. But sustainable construction needs to be present from when you're addressing the need, through the design, through your relationship with the community, where you're going to put that project, what happens after you're done and you leave and people are living there or studying there or working there, and what happens even after that when we're talking about demolition, repurposing, or that kind of thing. So that's one paradigm we're trying to change. And we do this with both the public and the private sector, because people tend to think of sustainable construction as only occurring in the construction phase. If they don't see hard hats and helmets and shovels, they're not thinking construction, So that's one. And the other one is maybe a more vertical way of looking at things is, as a developing country, Joanne, the most iconic, recognized sustainable projects that were present here in Costa Rica were usually projects belonging to multinational companies that would come in and do a lead project. So it'd be a very, a big glossy corporate center or something like that, very efficient, all the latest technologies. But then people start to associate sustainable construction with high tech, and it becomes something exclusive, where if you don't have this amount of money, you can't do this. Or there's a certain, overcost of doing that in a green way. So we try to break that down. We explain that we need our houses to be sustainable. We need our public schools to be sustainable, our health center to be sustainable. Social housing needs to be sustainable. Not only when you have the extra money to it's not an amenity kind of thing. So that's something that we work on as well. And we do this both in the public and the private sector. And little by little, we're seeing that, let's say, trickle into policy, right? Right now, for example, we've worked on some interesting projects with the Ministry of Housing on a sustainable design and construction regulation for social housing, which is something that before was something we couldn't even bring up. So now we are, obviously cost is very important when you're talking about social housing. You don't want to be able to do half the houses and make them green and then have a bunch of people still homeless. So we try to work with that with them. But these are things that are little by little trickling over to policy. The policymakers are understanding that, and we're doing the same thing with the private sector.
So do I hear you that there's a top-down and a bottom-up grassroots effect on policy, and that's where the success opportunities are when we come together like that, and government are listening to the people that know the local solutions, and it's a sort of a decentralization in a way.
Exactly. I think it's a good way of putting it. Yes, it is top down and bottom up in the sense that, for one, the first thing you have to achieve is get the government to listen, first of all, because often in several departments, it's like, we've been doing it this way for 50 years. We know what we're doing. We don't need anything new, kind of thing. And it's not easy to come and say, well, you've been doing it wrong for 50 years. That's not what you want to say. But the idea is to explain exactly that. I think what we call the business case for green plays a large role in this, Joanne. Explaining, first of all, let's get that out of the way. It's not a huge overcost. There are savings. You are a government. You should be interested in what it costs you to operate your hospital after you build it, not just how much it costs you to build it, kind of thing. So we have these conversations, and we start to explain that a lot of this is not actually extra cost. It does give greater resilience, greater safety, and lots of the co-benefits that go along with that. And then on the other hand, also bringing into account that people know how to do this here. We don't have to invent the wheel. We can see what our ancestors and previous generations, how they've dealt with storm winds, how they've dealt with, making built environments cooler with larger overhangs, this and that, how they raise buildings off the ground in flooded areas, or areas where they tend to flood. You don't have to, there's been a huge tendency to kind of just forget everything that was done in the past and kind of copy paste what we see on YouTube or something like that, when not always the solution that might be excellent for Norway is the best solution for the Caribbean and Costa Rica. That doesn't mean you should be paying attention to what's working in Norway. Maybe you can adapt that to make that, let's say, to your social and local context, but you can't just copy paste. That's the lazy, easy way out, which unfortunately today is very easy, Joanne, with internet, with making logistics so easily. It is very easy for people to just copy paste solutions from other places without going through the homework of seeing how that's going to work in your community, how you're going to affect the community, how this is going to tie into public services, so on and so forth. So there is a lot of that going on.
I had a role in local government in New South Wales, in Sydney. For 3.5 years, I was the community planning coordinator, and I developed a healthy aging plan. It took about 3 years. There was a lot of engagement with different groups, asking them what was important to them, what was missing, how would they like to see things, and then you put that into a strategy based on values and principles, and then out of that you create an action plan, sort of short, medium and long term action plan, and then that has to go through approvals and all of that. It's very long-winded, but what came out of it is that often solutions for the 20th century are still trying to be used in the 21st century, and we have evolved, and consciousness needs to evolve with it, and leadership. We have all the resources. It's just the leadership awareness needs to shift, and policies need to meet the people, because government really does serve the people. That's the role of government, and that's why they need to listen more carefully, I think, to what people are saying.
It's to me, it's surprising when we've been invited to meetings where people explain a policy to us, like, we're really worried about this because we don't know why we haven't had the impact we've had. We need you to bring in the private sector. Private sector really doesn't trust our solutions. They're not coming on board with what we're trying to implement. We're trying to do things sustainably. And you start to ask a little bit, well, and how did you arrive at these decisions, at these solutions? What was the process? Did you have charrettes or community meetings, town halls? How did it go? And none of that. And so you can't be surprised when the impact of launching a new policy isn't what you expected if you kind of built this in on an island, and just bring it out there kind of thing. We had a very interesting experience with a project called the Zero Carbon Building Accelerator, which was promoted by the World Resources Institute, WRI they're called, a multilateral organization. And we implemented this with 4 municipalities here in Costa Rica. And the very first thing we did was make a huge list of interested stakeholders. And the thing is that was very different, because normally what they would say is, don't you mean strategic stakeholders? And I said, no, interested stakeholders, because you don't want to invite the people that are strategic or important. You want who are they? And then after that, your next list is, we didn't use this publicly, but in our meetings we would talk about who are the blockers, who is going to most likely be opposed to what we want to propose here. So let's make a special plan and intentionally go after them, sit down with them, listen to them, like you were saying, and see how this is going on. And amazingly, the projects in the 4 municipality had greater impact and uptake than they'd ever had in similar kind of projects before, because we took the time. We weren't very creative or some brilliant new solutions. We just had all of the necessary information to take that into account before proposing things. And I think, unfortunately, from a policy standpoint. And this is municipal, where you're usually closer to the people. At a national level, obviously, there's even more distance, maybe. So it's harder to get that input and make sure that's taken into account. But it is improving. We are working very closely.
I think that's the first rule in facilitating. You have to ask who's in the room and who's not in the room that should be in the room.
Exactly.
And it's usually the blockers. And of course, you don't want them to block you. But the crazy wisdom comes from the collective. You have to listen to everybody. And when you invite people in, this is when the magic happens. So well done for that.
Thank you. Yes, I agree.
We'll be back to the conversation in just a minute. In the meantime, here's a little more about Arcons. Arcons has a mission to advance the efficiency, quality and profitability of project outcomes for its customers by providing best-in-class technology and services. If you're looking for a digitalization and sustainability-focused partner to help you achieve your goals, join the thousands of AEC and manufacturing customers globally who have turned to Arcons to start their journey toward a better built environment and smarter manufacturing. With more than 50 locations around the world, Arcons can connect you to the right technologies and expertise so you can improve your competitive position and increase profitability. Arcons has an industry expert to help you navigate the best pathway forward wherever you are on your digitalization and sustainability journey. Visit arcons.net to find out more. Now back to our conversation. When we were talking offline, you mentioned a guide for developers.
Yes.
In Costa Rica, do you mean, or in Central America? Can you explain a little bit more about that and scope?
Sure. We're in the process of this project right now. It's not completed yet. But we're very excited about this project because we do think it's very innovative, which makes it very challenging, but also very rewarding. This is a project that is being carried out by GIZ, which is the German Cooperation Association. And basically what we're working on with them is developing a guide for developers, for property developers, on how they can learn to determine the economic value of investments they make in strategies related to biodiversity and resilience within their projects. And I'll explain that a little bit. The developers usually are very savvy, very experienced, and they have very refined calculations in terms of how much can I charge for this if I offer this, So they take into account the value of the square meter in that area, what the views are like. Am I offering a pool? Am I offering a gym? Do I have a park for dogs? Different amenities that they call them. They add, and they say, okay, if we do this, then we can charge this, and we want to keep our prices low, so we don't do this. And they let's say tinker with that to get to the sweet spot that they want for their market, right? More and more developers are asking us, how do we give the customers what they want? Because they're demanding more biodiversity, they're demanding greener projects, they're demanding this and that, but I don't know what they want. So I don't know what to invest in. Should I make bigger parks? Should I give them a neighborhood garden? What kind of things will be of value so that I can invest the money where I think it's going to be appreciated? Let's say, right? So this guide is basically we're working on 3 fronts: resilience, biodiversity, and let's say the economic evaluation of those strategies. Okay, what costs what, and what can you expect back on that? And this is the idea is that the final product be a guide so that other developers can take this along and say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I'm interested in this, and I'm interested in that. So, for example, to give you a few examples, we're doing a case study where for the resilience side, we're analyzing, we're using a guide, an online, a free online tool, which is called the Building Resilience Index, which was developed by the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, which is a branch of the World Bank. Okay. And so they have this online tool where you start putting project information about your project in terms of, is there a risk of flooding? Is there a risk of this? What kind of design do you have in terms of wind resistance? Are you close to forests that could catch fire? Is there flooding in the area? What's the precipitation like there? Are you close to any geoseismic fault lines? Things like this. And it evaluates your project in terms of resilience. High risk here, low risk there. And then you can start to determine, okay, I want to put more money into this because maybe this is a higher impact risk and a more probable risk, and not so much into this other one, which is a low impact risk and very little, in the Central Valley of Costa Rica, you're not going to have a tsunami. So maybe you shouldn't be doing too much design for tsunamis kind of thing. So that's the resilience side. And the biodiversity side is very interesting because we have, obviously in Costa Rica, we're very rich in biodiversity, but we're also very compact. So you can travel 10 minutes in one direction and you're in a totally different, you could go from tropical rainforest to, tundra kind of thing, or, it depends on elevation and everything. So the biodiversity aspect is also very interesting. And the idea is to bring all this down to a very simple, at least a preliminary entrance level where developers say, oh, okay, I can do this, and this will help me do this, and this is what I can expect in return. This is how I can work this into because basically what we're trying to do is we want to make this attractive for developers so they can incorporate more resilience and biodiversity aspects into their projects and not be worried that they're going to be throwing away their money and it's not going to be appreciated, let's say, in a certain way. And this is very important, John. We're being very intentional with the guide. We don't want this to be something exclusive. It's not only for the very high-end projects so you can, charge the most money for the unit. The idea is actually do it the other way around. Where can I invest small things with a big payback in terms of good for the environment, good for the biodiversity? What species should I be protecting where I am? Those kinds of things. So we're very excited about that project. We hope to have it ready for launching around August.
Okay, just to sum up then, the principles of the guide are about biodiversity protection, providing social and economic benefit, not just the economic, is it?
Exactly. The idea is social and economic benefit. How can you make a project more rich in biodiversity and resilience without bringing up the cost? To give you one example, right? Those are the aspects of it, yes.
Sounds
and
amazing.
The idea is it's basically all related to kind of return on investment, but being very careful, like I said, we don't want to tempt everyone to just go as high as they can in terms of cost or what they can offer it for, but actually how can they make the most of the money they have for the development to make it richer in these aspects in biodiversity.
So going back to the stakeholders, who did they engage other than yourselves in Costa Rica? Was there the German company, is it?
The German development fund. They're very present in Costa Rica and all of Central America. They do a lot of work, especially they do a lot of work in the biodiversity sector, in protecting the environment, in lots of social projects as well, lots of gender and equity projects. This is one of the first projects they're doing actually within the built environment. They've been very strong and very recognized for works in social and biodiversity in other areas, but this is the first time they're kind of leaning over into the built environment. That's why we're so happy to be collaborating with them on this.
So Nicolas, listening to what you said there about risk analysis, how does this affect insurance?
Well, that's a very interesting topic, John. We've been investigating it for a while and doing some research. In general terms, green buildings do bring a very, very good, very attractive benefits, especially to portfolio owners in terms of insurance premiums, because green buildings have historically been related to a lower risk in terms of climate adaptation, health and well-being, and so on and so forth. So premiums do on general scales. There are global surveys that have demonstrated that green buildings usually pay less in insurance premiums than standard or traditional buildings. In the terms of this study in particular, the guide we're developing, resilience goes straight to the heart of that, because resilience is all about risk. So when you're talking about risk mitigation, if a project performs very well in resilience, the risk goes down. And this should be reflected directly in terms of insurance premiums. Now, once again, there let's say the trick is, or the interesting part is, how do you choose what aspects of resilience do I invest in that I'm going to see that return in my insurance, which ones maybe not so much, So that's why it's very important to make these analysis as locally contextualized as possible. If you're a coastal city, you might want to analyze tsunamis a little bit more. If you're surrounded by forests, like certain areas of Australia, you might want to take a look at how you are in terms of risk with wildfires and what mitigation strategies are being taken into account, and so on and so forth. So that's important. But the insurance is very tied into this, and it is one of the aspects that makes these subjects very attractive to developers and large portfolio owners.
I'm glad you explained that, because it seemed like an obvious connection to me, and that these insurance companies would be interested in the data that's coming out of the project. So
yes, the important thing is to make sure that the data is available, so they don't use it against the occupants. Actually, what we want to do is this to be a driver to bring costs down, not to bring costs
absolutely
up.
Right. So, natural resources in the built environment include water, and the World Green Building Council came out with a publication, as you probably are aware, last November on water uses in the built environment at the 4 scales of the built environment. Do you have any advice for developers using water to build or to manufacture products for the built environment in Costa Rica?
Yes, sure. I think the approach, or let's say the perspective in which water usage is viewed, varies quite a bit geographically. Here in Central America, there's huge differences between Costa Rica and maybe El Salvador or Honduras or Mexico. There are large differences, but what I can say is this: there are places that have naturally more water and places that have less water, and this is often not an advantage. For example, in Costa Rica, we have a lot of pure, clean water, and the problem with that is we have decades and decades of not appreciating that and underappreciating water. So now, when we start to talk about water efficiency and water usage, it's really, really difficult to get that point across when people are just used to not being rational with their use of water. The cost down. I'll give you a very sad example. Here we have excellent potable water coverage within the country. I think it's one of the highest globally, 98, 99% potable water in the whole country. But that is provided by the state. And that company that provides that potable water, actually, the water that let's say the end user receives is 51% of the water they produce. So they lose 49% of the water that they capture in their inefficient systems, leaks, not reporting potable water when pipes break and things like this. So that's just an example of, we're losing half the water that we capture, and that's not something that's easy to fix, because this is a very old, system, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of work in terms of mindset change to be done there. And this trickles, like you mentioned, this goes everywhere from like manufacturing sectors. Manufacturers are not used to being water efficient. Water is still very cheap for them. And so in that sense, they have no problem with not using it wisely, let's say. And this all the way to the other extreme of the spectrum, the householder, the independent householder. It's very common for people here. You can walk by a house and have just the faucet open, because they're watering their lawn 3 times a day here or whatever. We don't have that, let's say that we're not culturally aware of that yet here. So there's a lot of work to be done in different sectors. And it's very different, for example, for energy. Energy here is one of the most expensive kilowatt hours in all of Central America, and water is one of the cheapest. So we do have to there's a lot of work to be done there, let's say. Now, there is a progress being made. There are several water reuse strategies. The built environment is starting to take up on capturing rainwater, using it for gray water uses like toilets and industrial uses and things like this. And it is expected for the water to go up drastically in cost in a very short amount of time, and also to become more and more scarce because of climate change. So in that sense, the Green Building Council feels responsible for educating our public as much as possible so that these quick shifts don't run us over and we're actually a little bit more prepared for what's coming, kind of thing.
Yeah, I had a very interesting conversation with Dr. Dennis Truax a few weeks ago. There's a podcast where he talks about water in North America and the built environment. So maybe you could have a listen to that, because he commented on the publication and he said what he thought was missing. So it'd just be interesting to have that perspective if you get time to have a look or have a listen.
Definitely.
Awesome.
Definitely, Joanne. Thank you.
So as we close out today's conversation, Nicolas, when you think about the Green Building Council's influence on sustainability outcomes in Costa Rica for protecting its diversity and the social structure of the country, what excites you the most?
Lots of things. I think it's a very interesting time for the Green Building Council. For several years, we were trying to get close to the government, the public sector, trying to offer insight, advice, and it was very hard for them to understand that although we are a Green Building Council whose members are all private sector, because that's the way the legal structure works, we were not really selling anything, So for after years and years of pro bono work for them, for us just offering studies, offering guidance, giving them valuable information, alternative studies, and things like that, I think we finally made some pretty good headway in the sense that we are right now trusted advisors of several ministries of the government and several municipalities as well. So we're actually beyond the point where we're calling them to let us, take a look at something and have a meeting with them. And they're actually calling us, hey, why don't you come in, participate? Tell us what you think about this. We're considering signing this declaration or this international thing. What do you know about this? What is it good for our country? What do we need right now? Kind of thing. And that's really nice to be in that place, because we think that we're having maybe more impact and being into account, and we can help promote things that we know have gone through the proper channels. And they're also seeing the impact of these initiatives when they get launched. As I mentioned before, sometimes they go through all this work and honest work, and they're surprised when things don't have the uptake in the private sector or in the streets when they're launched. And I think they're starting to see that when they take us into account on these subjects, obviously there is much more uptake, collaboration, and synergies with the private sector. And for things to get to where we need them to be, Joanne, by 2030 and by 2050, we need as much public-private collaboration as possible. So I think we're at a good point to do that now. We're actually finally having some good impact. We're always aware of what's going in other places. Like I said, GBC Australia, US GBC, Canada GBC. So we're learning of what things work in other sectors, how they can adapt to ours, and leapfrogging along the way and helping each other out. And so I think we're finally starting to see things move forward at an accelerated pace. And that obviously gives us hope and energy to push forward.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Well, thank you so much, Nicolas, for coming on the show. And I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person in Costa Rica, or perhaps later this year. Are you going to London in June?
I'm going to London in June, yes. Yes, for the World Leadership Summit.
Well, I'll be there.
Oh, excellent, Joanne. We have to have a coffee.
Let's do that. Awesome. I'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you very much for the invitation.
This podcast was brought to you by Arcons. Arcons is leading the digital transformation of the AEC and manufacturing industries by providing best-in-class technology solutions from world-leading partners and their own in-house development software from the Arcons Be Smart portfolio for building, infrastructure, and manufacturing. Arcons is a company that cares about creating and building a better world. Together, we are working with industry and environmental experts, providing forums and platforms through our Arcons Think community to create conversations that matter to our future generations. We invite you to join in the conversation and participate in our Think community. Like and subscribe to Think Future to stay up to date with the latest innovations and conversations as we advance the digital journey for the AEC and manufacturing around the world. You can download our podcasts at arcons.net or from your favorite podcast platform.